What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I am on the mission to find the magic ingredient that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Coline Pannier. She is a designer of video games, and from her, I learn what we can learn from video game design about the design of workshops that deliver results. Enjoy the show. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, lean back, enjoy the content, and then visit workshops.work to download my one-page summary. Stay tuned. Coline.
Hi.
Good to have you here.
Happy to be with you.
Thank you for taking the time. A few months ago, we met to catch up, and you shared so many interesting things about your work as a game designer and a teacher of game design, and your experience of co-design it in France. And I thought, okay, I need to get you on the show to just share all of that with a wider audience. So maybe we can start with something like the beginning.
Right.
When did you start calling yourself a facilitator, or how did you get in touch with facilitation?
I wouldn't say that I call myself a facilitator in the sense that I've been facilitating some workshops, and I'm really interested in the concept of workshops. But it's like one of the many things that I do, and I find it really hard to stick to one title or job or activity. So I would say facilitation is something that I go back to regularly, like other fields. And facilitation, what really fascinates me about this concept is the posture of the facilitator, who is really there to transmit something, some energy between participants, and is kind of in the background compared to the content or the energy from the participants. So in a way, it's a role that I think requires a lot of humility and a lot of self-awareness. And that goes well with me sometimes when I'm in that place. But on the other hand, I also love to work on projects and deliver things and be in action and being like the person who actually creates the content. So who is being facilitated, so to speak. And I think both are complementary, but for me, I cannot choose one or the other.
Makes total sense. And I wonder whether you would find the space to combine these two ways of interacting with groups in your work as an educator with students.
Yes, absolutely. And teaching is one of my passions. I really love to create new content in a way that people will get it. And that's also something I discovered when I was originally, one of my first jobs was working for Ubisoft in the training department. I learned so much about instructional design and how to make sure people can grow in their skills, but also share a common understanding of what words mean. And through this work in instructional design, I came to really love the technique associated with didactics and also workshops and educational workshops, creation workshops, all these methods. They all have this one thing in common, I think, which is how do you get people from point A to point B in a way that is fun and engaging and
without dragging them.
Yeah, exactly. And how do you use their intrinsic motivation to somehow you stir the process, but you're not pushing anything. You're just allowing it to happen. That's something I find quite magical.
What do you think can other educators learn from instructional design or from facilitation?
When I started teaching, I had this image in my head of what a teacher should be. It was based on my experience as a student and as a pupil in France in the 90s. And it was this idea that the teacher is the person who knows and will give the knowledge to the pupils, who will, from my experience, write a lot and listen a lot and not have that much input in the process. And compared to when I grew up in the 80s and 90s in France, the educational world is so different. We give so much more emphasis on actively involving the students nowadays. So knowledge of how to create workshops and how to facilitate discussions is becoming more and more actually a required skill for teachers, especially where I teach at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. We are trained into becoming more like coaches and facilitators. And we are still experts in our domain, but we want to extract the knowledge from the students and encourage the students to look for answers themselves. That's the skill they need to grow in the 21st century. Not a skill to listen to me, talking about some stuff, but how to ask yourself the right questions, conduct experiments, find answers through experiments that are more or less valid, and how to question also your own findings in a critical way. So you want to facilitate that also between the students, so they listen to each other and they build on each other's knowledge and experience.
And how does... And I don't want to go too deep down the road of education, but I'm still curious. How does the concept of humility that you mentioned beforehand fit into a space where your role is to be an educator or trainer?
Recently, someone asked me, what is your favorite virtue? And the answer that came immediately to mind is humility, because it's the virtue that allows you to learn all the other ones. It's the basic approach to life where you can ensure that you will always keep learning, because all the knowledge that, in my experience, I've acquired through different stages of my life, at some point becomes obsolete or needs to be reframed or reconsidered in some other ways. So becoming like too proud or too stuck in one's way, even as a teacher, can be very damaging. So it's always a fine balance between knowing that you know something, but also acknowledging your ignorance on so many topics. And I work especially in game development and in IT. It's changing so fast. At some point, I became a bit overwhelmed thinking, what can I teach these young people? Because they probably know more than me about, the recent games and this humble approach to teaching is a way to recognize a different level of expertise as well. It's an expertise in more like in processes of critical thinking, an expertise in didactics, in helping people form conclusions. And that remains quite stable, I think, through all stages of humanity. It's the kind of scientific method.
Yeah, already applied by Socrates.
Yeah, exactly.
And also this helps us to stay curious. Knowing what we don't know. So in our previous conversation, you already shared a little bit about the game design that you're teaching, but also applying yourself. And I would be curious to hear, what is it from game design that we can apply to maybe also workshop design? And then maybe go a further way down to talk about personal development and game design.
Right, that's a very broad topic. But to bring it maybe to the first step, which is what can game design teach us maybe for workshops? I think the first thing is a realization that people need and want and strive for challenges. That is, for me, the main lesson of games. Games are an experience where someone gives you stuff to do that is hard on purpose. So these days we talk a lot about convenience and how to make things easier and more convenient. And I think game designers do the other way around. They think how to create interesting challenges for someone so they can develop their skill. And also, how can we put these challenges in a meaningful system, in a meaningful environment, or epic story, or some crazy competition that will push them to give the best of themselves. And it's a misconception, I think, of humans that we are like lazy and we don't want to do anything. And we actually underestimate the drive that everybody has to contribute to something meaningful together and difficult.
And it actually makes sense because we somehow create our own challenges and problems every day, because otherwise we'd just get bored by the everyday routine.
Yes, absolutely.
So to use this in a very explicit context. I think that makes sense. And there's something that popped up in my mind immediately when I think of, okay, we could use the concepts of game design more often. So if I got you correctly, including purposefully challenges to make it a bit more complicated or challenging. How can we then still call ourselves facilitators who make things easy?
Yeah, that's the great question. And I worked with this collective in Paris called Co-Design It, where I learned a lot about facilitation, but also this field of co-design, which is kind of in the middle of design thinking and facilitation. And this idea of designing workshops in a way that you design, for example, a 3-day session with so many moments and so many emotions and also experiences and moments of diverging or converging or resolving things together. For me, it's quite similar to the way you would design a game experience in the sense that you start from what do you want people to experience? And then you create the framework that goes around it. And co-design does that in a way that you work with the clients already to create a miniature experience of collaboration where they will start designing the framework with you for their workshop. And you continue this process in a recursive manner. So everything is about designing and also reflecting on your design. What I see from game design that is very different from workshops is that game designers start usually from game mechanics. So you have like a jumping mechanic in a platform game like Mario, Super Mario. Or you have a betting mechanic in poker. And from the mechanic, you can create experiences because you start from the challenges you're creating or from the experience from a very specific angle of adding the obstacle first. That's what you do.
So basically, if I understand it correctly, we have a goal. So for instance, in Super Mario, we want to beat the bad guy, or in poker, we want to win the game. And depending on this goal, we have challenges, and the mechanics would help us to overcome these challenges.
Not exactly, because the mechanics are what creates the challenge. So it's the additional friction or moment that will add something that will go against you reaching the goal. There is this amazing sentence by the philosopher Bernard Suits that is often used to describe games. And he says, game is basically the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. And why is it like that? Why is it unnecessary? And he gives the example of golf. If you think, what is the goal of golf? It's to take a series of balls from one point to the next and put them in a hole. So if you say that and you think, okay, what is the most efficient way to reach this goal? Well, you pick up the balls, you walk to the hole and you put them in it.
Yeah.
Right, that's not much fun, is it? So what you have to do is invent all these rules that will prevent you from reaching your goal.
Yeah.
So you'd say, okay, you have to actually hit the ball with a stick and this is the areas where you're allowed to go, not allowed to go. And then you have with golf also some etiquette that explains the allowed behaviors, etc., etc. So all these unnecessary stuff that is added to prevent you from reaching your goal is actually what creates the experience of golf and thus the fun of playing it.
Yeah.
And this mechanic, this challenge is what tests your skill. So it forces you to grow a competence at something. In the case of golf, it's probably mostly about, the physical competence of hitting the ball. There is some strategy around it, some planning, lots of different skills you can develop around it. And I think often in the various things we're trying to create with people collaboratively, we can benefit from understanding that people like challenges. They like interesting challenges. And if you see like the success of escape rooms, for example.
Good example, yeah.
People love solving challenges together.
Yeah.
It's fun to have, a problem that we can solve together. So a good workshop for me gives an interesting problem to solve for people that will allow them to become more awesome by growing their skills together.
So for instance, I totally get that point, and I would like to stretch it a little bit further. So in a case where groups come to us because they already have a problem. So for instance, they have an important decision to take or priorities to set. So the obstacles are already there, but the obstacles are not fun.
Exactly, yes.
Would you then use these obstacles? Would you create new ones, or would you still try to remove these obstacles?
I think it's the very key and essential question to the quality of obstacles. Mm-hmm. Some obstacles, if they are well designed, like in a game, will make us grow and will then be fun. Mm-hmm. A lot of obstacles that we have in our lives are totally unnecessary, but absolutely not conductive of fun, either because they are designed by default or they just incrementally occurred and they are just some consequence of something not functioning well, like in organizations. Or they are obstacles that are added, but not at the right level for us, or it's not something that we can solve. So it just becomes a source of frustration. And we have to work with our environment, with what exists. There are certain things we cannot change. So we have to work with that. And it's the wisdom to know what to change and what not to change. It's not an easy...
Or the mastery.
Yeah, it's the ultimate mastery.
Yeah.
You have this perfect understanding, what is necessary and what is something to change.
And you mentioned the word frustration, and I think that's key. Because even in a workshop, sometimes it's fun to go through, even if it's a painful conversation. It's still fun and playful, and sometimes it's just frustrating. And for games, it's the same. If I keep on failing, if I keep on dying at this one point in Super Mario, I will be frustrated and I will start playing another game. So I'll give up. So how do you define as a game designer this right amount of challenge that is challenging enough to keep on playing without getting frustrating?
So how do you design a good game when you're a game designer? The answer is playtest. You create a game and then you ask a lot of people to test it. Because you can never really know in advance on paper if it's going to be fun or not. So that's the main answer. How do you do it? You test it on people.
Makes sense.
But if you want to think about how to create good challenges for someone, you have to think, what is the level of skill of this person? And I have this also as a teacher with students. I want to create a workshop for them that is going to be fun and engaging. It's going to be hard enough that they're going to have to sweat a bit on it, but not too hard that they're going to be completely discouraged. And especially, I think, with younger students, they are easily discouraged, and they are also often thinking that they cannot do it, that they don't have the right knowledge or skill, so they will just give up. And frustration can be a very powerful tool because it's what drives us to learn something. We fail, then if we want to continue, we have to practice and we have to learn. So it can be a very powerful tool for development. I think what's a good way to decide if it's a good frustration for you or not is your intrinsic motivation about the task or the challenge. Do you really want to do it? Or is someone forcing you to do it? And if you think it's a valuable goal, even if it's difficult, you will be willing to go through a lot of, difficult, tough moments just because you really care about succeeding.
And this sounds to me in a workshop context that if the challenge is closely related to the purpose and the goal of the workshop, then the group will also be intrinsically motivated to go through that.
Absolutely. The alignment of the purpose with the challenge at hand is absolutely crucial. If you do something that is hard, but you don't know why, it's extremely actually demotivating because you feel like you're just running in circles. Literally, you're just like a hamster in a wheel, having to put up this energy. Yeah, you're totally wasting your time.
So to come back to the question that I asked previously, if you have a group that already have challenges and a problem, how would you deal with them? Would you just reframe them into a fun way? Or would you create new challenges?
I think you have to reframe in the sense that everything that the group can change, can change. Everything that the group cannot change is part of the environment and is a given.
So this is like the thin stick in the golf game. Then it becomes part of the rules of the game instead of a challenge of the game.
Well, it's more like if you stay with golf and you think there are some things you cannot change, like gravity. Mm-hmm. But gravity plays an important part in golf. Yeah. It's still something you just have to live with. If you look at gravity in a way that you can just complain about gravity, it makes me have to get up out of bed in the morning. It's so hard. Or without gravity, it would be easier to make planes fly with less fuel. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's just not the right way to think about it.
Yeah.
What is some of the fixed element of the environment that we cannot change? All right, let's admit that this is out of our control, or at least for the moment, just a given. And then if it's something we can change, then be really clear about it and then go through with it. And that's a problem, I think, in some workshops, that sometimes people during the workshop, they have the power to change things. And then when comes the implementation phase, somehow someone devalidates it or blocks it, or it cannot go through. And probably if we want to talk about alignment with purpose, we have to start at this very fundamental level of how much power do people actually have to go through with their decisions that they made during the workshop. And that takes a lot of courage from the top of the organization to really trust people to actually make important changes in their work environment.
Yeah, to either empower them or to help them to gain the skills that they would then need to go through the challenges of implementation.
Yes, it can be a problem of skill development, HR challenges of all sorts, like also recruitment or changing some organizations sometimes. It can be just a problem of adapting the processes of the company or the organization that are conductive of some other behavior because they are wired to do something else. Yeah. And all this needs to be addressed for me if you want to really tackle the problem from the intrinsic motivation of people. You have to first remove all these unnecessary abusive obstacles that will not be fun because they are standing in the way of value creation.
So in a workshop context, what would be a nice or meaningful obstacle that you would create? So for instance, you're doing a workshop to help a team to come up with the top 3 priorities that they want to focus on in 2021. And then it could be a very smooth and boring process, talking about the obvious.
I think there are a lot of creativity tools that are used for this exact purpose. I'm thinking on top of my head, like the Bono hats, or you do it from the perspective of a role. Or you can also do it from a totally different narrative. For example, we are all in the year 2050 in a spaceship. You can make it also, games play a lot with fantasy. You can make it an environment that is completely different from your everyday life at the office. And then it opens new perspectives. So all of these for me are little tiny obstacles in the sense that they will put you in a place somewhere else when you're not originally. All these creativity tools are wonderful for stimulating a process that goes outside of the usual track.
So basically defining new restrictions or new roles to the game.
Yes, absolutely.
That we are playing in the moment.
Restricting it in some way. Like the taboo game, for example. You can say something, but not using these words.
The most obvious
words, yes.
True, yeah.
Everything to force you to not think the way you would normally. I would consider a nice, cool obstacle for a workshop.
Yeah. Also because having restrictions usually helps us to develop our creativity, because if everything is possible, nothing is possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you have to tune it to what do you want to achieve in this phase of the workshop. So if you're diverging, what you want is to force people to maybe not think about the implementation or the operational realization of their work. So maybe the spaceship example is great when people have to think other contexts. If you are more in a converging phase, then you will want to do the opposite. Mm-hmm. You want to think all the possible horrible scenarios that could happen and then use this as your constraint to restrict the power to make crazy plans.
True, makes total sense. Because usually when we say, okay, let's not think about the constraints and about implementation, it's like this, don't think about white elephants, and then all you can think of are white elephants.
Yeah.
But if you put them into a new context, that just removes this constraint or this implementation.
Yeah, and maybe if you think workshop, again to the concept of purpose, mm-hmm. if you can also explain to people beforehand that they are going to go through these phases or there will be different moments to explore different things, mm-hmm. then you might also remove the blocks that people think, oh, it's never going to be applicable anyway, mm-hmm. because we're just going to do this post-it thing and then whatever. So if you already can say, tomorrow we will look more on this aspect or that aspect, mm-hmm. it's also a way to create a loop between all these different levels.
Can you guide us through this creation of loop? Because I think that's also a different art to really align all these different games that we would, or exercise that we would do in the process of getting the people from A to B without dragging them. And maybe even an example from game design. How do you get from level A to level B or from one scenario to the other without adding too much friction, but making it smooth?
From my limited experience with big workshop designs, what I think is the most interesting is to start the process of designing something together from the first sponsor meeting, mm-hmm. where people who want to collaborate on creating something new come together and already start the process of collaborating to create something new, mm-hmm. which is, in this case, the workshop. So you do these meetings where it's already a small loop of collaboration, of creating something together, mm-hmm. a process that a co-designer can facilitate and help happen. Mm-hmm. And everybody is already in this mindset that we are busy finding the structure that allows us to create something together, and then perpetuate this mindset through the workshop itself. So the workshop is also organically evolving as well throughout the session. In a context of a video game, let's take, for example, a game that a lot of people know, like Mario Kart. Mm-hmm. If you look at how it's designed, it has a lot of different levels of loops of objective, challenge, and reward, what we call OCR loops. Mm-hmm. And the first most important challenge to get right is the toy. Is like, how fun is your cart to manipulate and to play? Mm-hmm. If you don't get that right, you can imagine a huge story of carts or amazing races, beautiful decors, all that you want. But if mm-hmm. the cart is not fun to pilot, mm-hmm. what's the point, of playing Mario Kart? So that's the first thing that the game designer has to get right, together, of course, with the rest of the mm-hmm. team, because in games it's a big team. It's the toy and the core challenge mm-hmm. that is at the heart of the game. And this has to be fun in itself. Mm. And then you can add different levels. For example, the core challenge of driving your cart and having fun mastering your curves in the race fits with the race itself. Mm-hmm. That is a much longer challenge of like 2 minutes maybe. Mm-hmm. This 2-minute challenge fits in a bigger challenge, which is your position in the race, which is your position in the leaderboard mm-hmm. after several races, mm-hmm. which itself fits in the bigger loop of all the races you can unlock in Mario Kart, and then maybe the infinite amount of races you can play with your friends. Mm-hmm. So all of these fit into each other. They are very much aligned. You know that if you get better at the micro level, you will get better at the macro level. And that's the thing that is hard to get right in real life, mm-hmm. because who says what is the macro challenge? You cannot really know. It's hyper emergent. It's always evolving. Mm-hmm. The only thing you can do is work at your level to align, your micro challenge at your level. At the moment where you are doing it, that you are really doing it for the right reason. You're aligned with yourself, and then with the organization that you're working with, or the team, or the people you're working with. And from that point of view, trust that the results will be more alignment because everybody's starting from this perspective, right?
There's one word that pops up in my mind when I listen to you, and this is sprints. Sprints.
Sprints. I don't know nothing about sprints.
Sprints. What kind of sprints? No, sprints.
Yes.
And sprints are also something used by all the techs and all the IT teams. So what can we learn about sprints from game design?
Well, that's a very good question because I asked myself this question recently. And sprints, I think I've been working with Scrum as a framework for producing software and games. And it's also something we teach with students. It's really interesting how it works because it's designed a bit like a game, but like a bit of a board game in the way it's explained as well. So you have these roles and ceremonies and rituals. You also have time-boxed events. So some things can be constrained, like how much time you can spend on something. Other things cannot be constrained, like what is the result of the process. You have to leave that completely open. The reason why Agile works in sprints is to find a moment that is fixed in terms of time and use this as a kind of tempo where you will evaluate the quality of your delivery on a regular basis. What we tend to do, and I come from the French culture, so this is very strong in France, but is think a lot about things, like think about all the possible scenarios, think, what could go wrong, make lots of plans with lots of indicators. Decisions around all the possible things that could, you can spend a lot of time pre-thinking things.
Yeah.
And what Agile software development teaches us is that after 1 month, all your assumptions are already totally obsolete because you evolve in a complex environment. So what you want to do is to have a few things that are fixed, and they are the sprint durations, some ceremonies in the sprint, like the moments where you will plan, the moments where you will inspect, and the moments you will also reflect as a team on what you've done. And this feedback loop is absolutely essential to the concept of Agile because it's from an experimental mindset. First, make an assumption, then translate this assumption into a user story, and then try to actually execute this user story. And once you've realized it, show it to the people who are supposed to enjoy your story and see if it's a good story or not. Did you get it right?
Yeah.
And get this feedback as soon as possible. You need sometimes like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, because you need to actually develop complex pieces of software sometimes. But you need to make it as short as possible and as regular as possible so you can also pace yourself and understand how much can we actually deliver over this time period.
And what do we need to learn for the next sprint? And this actually makes me wonder to what extent it also applies for workshops, because the beauty of games is that you know when you're going to die.
Do you?
So, or at least they're very clear triggers.
You know why you die.
You know why you die. Yeah. And you know when you're dead.
Yeah.
Right? So if you hurt yourself or you run into the wrong direction, there are very clear signals and signs for that. Whereas when you run into wrong direction in a process or in a creative process or thinking, how do you know that you went into the wrong directions? How can you actually learn from your mistakes when you're outside the game environment?
I'm very radical in this. I think if if I get some form of negative feedback from my environment, I immediately conclude that I did something wrong. Not like it's my fault, it's horrible, but more like I didn't read the situation correctly. There is something that was preconceived about my understanding of the situation that was wrong. I made a wrong assumption about what was going on. And for me, it's a healthy way of thinking. It's also something to do with humility.
I was about to say that, yeah.
But it's also what keeps the presence intense during a workshop. And I have a little trick in my head when I want to assess if the workshop is going well. Is this triangle, people, process, results. I noticed that myself, I'm sometimes too focused on the results. And then sometimes I want to push, people through the process to get the results. And then creates this kind of forced feeling of you're not enjoying it anymore. And probably this obsession with results is something, from the school years, childhood trauma. I don't know.
Blame France.
Yeah. I learned a lot of good stuff in the French system, don't get me wrong. But I was a bit obsessed about grades and getting grades. So I guess some of this still translates into some mistakes I make during workshops. And this triangle of people, process, results helps me to think, all right, am I now putting enough attention on the people or maybe too much on the process and then forgetting about the results? And it's always healthy to keep this also for other things like project management, other fields. Sometimes a workshop can be considered a failure because you didn't get the expected result, but it can be a great success because the people went through a process that they consider a fair process. And for them, it has a lot of value. And it helps also to reconsider what is my deeper goal as a facilitator or co-designer of a workshop. Sometimes a workshop has value just because of the team building, it can happen. And then it helps, I think, also during the workshop to feel if something is going wrong. Where is my focus at the moment? And should I shift it to the process or the result or the people?
Would this be something that you even articulate to the group, or is it pure self-reflection?
I wouldn't necessarily present this framework to the group, but I would feel if something is going wrong, I would phrase it in just, I feel that maybe you're a bit tired now, or do you think we're heading towards a good result? Or for process, you can observe it. That's it's quite visible if the process is going wrong, and then adjust your process. But I think it's always good to ask for feedback from people, from what they are going through, just from their emotional point of view. And then from that, infer an action as a facilitator.
Do you ever feel you're tired of the trip from home to the home office? That the physical confines of your house are not getting you the exposure to the new ideas that you need? Maybe you need Mastermind. At Mastermind, you work together with a group of peers who help you bring new perspectives to your challenges, to find new solutions, and who you can even give a little bit back to by helping them solve their problems. In a compressed 2 hours, you'll get a day's worth of learning. So why don't you get out of that box and come to Mastermind? workshops.work/mastermind.
You said that it's quite easy to get that the process is wrong. What would be signs for you to see that?
I guess you can see that the process is wrong if you have people who are not working together to achieve the results. That's the sign that it's wrong. And I'm really obsessed about processes. Maybe that's why I like game design and systems and, how do things move from one point to the next and how do they influence each other? And it's a lot of fine tuning and a lot of experience also to be able to adjust your process in real time and think, okay, maybe now they are all busy working on creating a lot of questions, but it's not very efficient in coming together. Everybody's working in their own corner or something. So then you will create a little tiny obstacle where you say, all right, now you're going to have 5 minutes to sit in that corner and do something together. I don't know what. That's the kind of thing I mean, that you can restrict things if you feel the flow needs to go in another direction.
And you mentioned a few times that workshops that can go wrong, that could fail. So what is for you a failed workshop?
If you think what is a failed workshop, it's all about what did you want to achieve, and then compare that with what did your client want to achieve, or your the person who gave you the mandate, and then what is the goal of the participants, and what did they want to achieve, or did they want in general from this day, from this workshop. From these different points of view, you can already get a lot of different answers. And a workshop has failed probably if one of these three parties is not happy with it. And that means there was maybe not the right alignment.
Yeah.
The alignment didn't happen.
And to what extent is the facilitator responsible for such a failure?
There is a lot that a facilitator can do. Sometimes things just fail. It's the way it is. For me, the responsibility of the facilitator is at the very beginning. If we accept a project that we feel is maybe something is not feeling right here, but okay, I need the money or I need to do something with this client, and we do it anyway. That's for me going to be one of the most challenging projects, because you also don't do it for the right reasons, or you're not completely aligned with yourself, right? And I think often the problems that occur in workshops are these kinds of situations where you know from the beginning that it's maybe sponsors don't have the right engagement, or people come here and they know it's for the show and then it's just a communication workshop. So it's this context that I think we have to feel as early as possible, and sometimes not do the workshop. For me, I'm also always talking about purpose. It's also what is the honest intention behind it. If you do a workshop, then what is the consequence of that? Are you ready to live with the consequence of your workshop? And that's something to check also with the sponsors, and when your own gut feeling, I guess.
Can you give an example of these consequences? When I think of, am I willing to live with the consequences? I struggle to picture that.
Well, let me give you an example of a workshop where people have to come together to create a new strategy for their digital presence. And the team comes together and has lots of nice ideas and starts to develop these ideas throughout the workshop with a roadmap, with things to do. And they come to this point where they really feel empowered and really happy about the results. And then the next day, it's still okay to continue on this idea, but there was also, this other boss who had some other idea, who wants this other process to go through, or, this misalignment between everything that you came up with during the workshop and the reality of the organization or the field or something else after it.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of consequence I have in mind.
Okay, now I also totally see where you were coming from. So if from the beginning you have the gut feeling that something is wrong, so then you're giving the group, you pretend that the group has some power in designing something meaningful, but actually you already know that there will be a disappointment because it might never be implemented.
Yes, and I think that's the power of workshops and collaborative workshops in general, to imagine something together that is awesome, that is transcending each department or, each team role, that it's a moment where we are building something together. It's a very important moment. And if this becomes a masquerade, for me, that's the moment where I think, it's not worth it. Then it's just, okay, maybe a good moment to relax outside of the office, right? Yeah. But I wouldn't call it a proper workshop, or it's a bit sad. I find it a bit sad.
Have you ever used the concept or the structure of game design inside an organization? So for instance, to redesign an organization or to design a strategy. And if you haven't, do you think it's possible to apply game design as back in the days design thinking was actually developed and implemented?
There is a trend of game thinking applied to a lot of product design and engagement, especially with apps, because game design is the path to mastery within a controlled environment. So it fits quite well with apps. Then when it comes to bigger environments and strategies like companies, actually, when you look at the difference between work and game, you think it's obvious, but it's not that obvious. Because in a game, you can do a lot of work, like busy work, or, you have to go in the forest and kill 200 pigs. That's the kind of typically RPG experience.
Mm-hmm. What is RPG?
It's a role-playing game,
Okay.
like these online role-playing games. If you look at World of Warcraft, which was one of the early successes, one of the most popular online role-playing games, a lot of the tasks you had to do were, if you look at them, like proper work or very boring tasks. And games are also systems that can be formalized with feedback systems and rules. And it's not that different from a company. The main difference is that you engage in a game activity with the goal and idea to entertain yourself or to visit some other universe and play along with some fantasy and have fun. Whereas you go to the office with the idea of making money and earning your bread and being productive. So the nuance is really, really subtle. And I see myself in general as some big adventure, and I like to have a lot of fun in all things that I do. And I still do some tasks at work that I know are a bit tedious or like bureaucratic or just necessary, like grading a lot of papers. So that sometimes become very long and hard. And I do it because I have a sense of purpose of belonging to a community of humans and being productive in society. And that's the connection that sometimes we lose at work, which I think is a bit of a shame. That I find it very important with my work to contribute to something meaningful. And if we want to design or to conceive company strategies like more like games, the goal is not to create this closed system like chess where everybody wants to move their pawns, but more like create a sandbox, more like Minecraft, where everybody can express their creativities because like you said earlier, what will happen if you do this or that. So just making the rules of the system very clear, very transparent as much as possible, and working on governance in a way that will clarify the distribution of power and resources in a way that is understandable by the people. And then you unleash the inner game designer of everybody.
Yeah.
Because then everybody can play with their sandbox.
On this canvas that has been clearly defined.
Yes, exactly.
I have this huge light bulb right now over my head that you might be able to see.
I don't see it, so it's good to have the subtext.
Yeah, the audience cannot see it either. Because what I find so intriguing about what you just shared is that when I think of game design, I think of fun, I think of creativity. I don't necessarily thought of structure, explicit rules, and clear processes and governance. But actually, this is exactly what you define, is that a game defines the context in which then beautiful things can happen, but everyone knows exactly about the rules and the challenges and maybe the skills they then need to develop in order to serve the higher purpose.
Yeah, and from my point of view in my roles in teaching, but also in how I manage projects in an agile way, which is not really to manage them, but more like to also being more facilitating the process of the project. It's as much as possible, clarify the procedures, clarify the rules, just like in a game. What is allowed, not allowed. It may sound stupid, but if you are in a project, and I had the experience recently that you don't know if it's needed to be active or not on the Trello board. Nobody told you that. Then you have people who also sit in between and they also feel guilty because they should contribute. Right? If you say, well, here we say after 3 months, if you don't contribute, you're out of the board.
Yeah.
Everybody is happy. Everybody wants this, this transparency and this clarity.
Yeah.
And then it's all about, I love this concept of psychological safety. So you want to remove the elements that are too blurry, that create this feeling of, I don't know what is expected of me. Should I be doing this or that? And then it makes us regress into this very scared child state. And what we want is to actually say, well, this is what's expected. This is the level of skill that we expect from you. Do you take the challenge or not?
Yeah.
And then help on demand.
Yeah.
That actually works, and that's proven in education, in work, in projects, in games, is
In life.
life. As the self-determination theory is this idea that the more you are in charge of your own goals, the more you can understand how to grow into the next step. The more you'll be in the flow, the more you will be happy with your life. And that's a beautiful lesson from games, I think. And the second one is how much we care about epic goals. And it's a bit tricky in business because you don't want to say, we're going to take over the world or have, some wishy-washy marketing brand goal like, we are helping people get happy when you're just selling coffee. So they can really sidetrack. But there are a lot of epic things we can do with businesses that are not outside of what we do. We're really inside at the core of the value that is being created. That's where you find the epic.
Awesome. One question that I always ask is, what is your favorite exercise? With all what you're doing in game design and facilitation and education and teaching, what do you enjoy most doing with groups?
I recently rediscovered this exercise that I actually love, and it's called the 3 minutes learning. It's very simple. It's good warm-up. You put people in pairs, and then you ask them to teach each other something in 3 minutes. So one person 3 minutes, the other person 3 minutes. And you can learn a lot actually in 3 minutes. It's a very sometimes useless skill. I learned the other day how to do 2 CrossFit warm-ups. And yes, and I can still remember them, and my legs as well.
Seems like a very effective exercise.
Yes, it worked. And I had to teach someone how to sing the beginning of the Marseillaise, the French national anthem. I think he forgot already about it. So some things are more or less easy to teach in 3 minutes. But I like what it does, this exercise, because it gives this impression that you can really learn something in a very short time. And it also puts you out of your usual context. You can teach someone, about yoga or a meditation technique, but also something technical, or like in my case, some language tricks, a joke. It can be anything in 3 minutes. And then we did also, last time I practiced it, a reflection on how did you teach this to this other person and how did you learn it? And a lot of it was about the person demoing or showing how to perform the action, and then you imitating and reproducing, which I found really interesting. And I realized so many of my classes have so little time dedicated to me showing how to do stuff, like you would in the workplace, for example. Instead of just saying, this is how an application should be, instead, let's design an application together and I will show you how I do it. And then you can try it yourself. That's this kind of teaching that I kind of forgot it exists, but it's actually very intuitive, yeah.
And it's true now that you're saying, this is usually when you asked me how to teach someone something quickly. Yeah, of course, I show it and then I ask you to repeat and then maybe we do it several times until it sticks. But as soon as we come into the education area,
then it's just you standing in front of slides and talking for 2 hours.
And you never give actually time to reflect or to repeat or to mirror.
Yeah. The mirroring thing is a bit lost in education in the modern world. I think we should really revisit it. It's very powerful. And I love also, since I've realized this, I started to practice it a bit with my students, designing like a fake app or a fake thing, and then using that also to show how to test things or, using it just as a practice project. Yeah. And it worked really well.
Awesome. Is there anything in all these different topics, from education to game design to facilitation to project management, is there anything that we haven't touched upon that you would like to share?
Well, one thing that I would like to share, because it really struck me recently when I went to an Agile day, is how much games have become part of everything, everywhere. When I graduated from my master's in HR, that was 2008, one of the teachers of the master's heard that I was interning at a video game company. And he said, all right, and then when are you going to intern at some real business?
When was that?
That was 2008.
Wow.
And he was a bit old school, but also still someone who was very open-minded. But it's just like a period where serious games were kind of starting to be a thing, but still, very timidly. And now when I went to the Agile conference and I saw people were so passionate about games and using games for all sorts of learning experiences, it's a very good tool for discovery, self-discovery, solving things together, exploring, experimenting with very complex systemic realities. And I was really delighted to see so much enthusiasm about games, and my inner geek is is really seeing this as the beginning of a totally different era for us.
So maybe as a follow-up, what is your understanding of gamification? Because when I interviewed Tamara, we talked about the difference between serious games and gamification, which is clear. What is your relation or definition or view on gamification?
I don't think I have a lot of experience with gamification because it's not like a practice that I formally try to develop. But I think I do it anyway. Like for me, it's more like a mindset to try and think about things like game systems. What I find is the most interesting development is the development of playfulness. So this notion of toying with ideas, with problems. And serious games have this capacity to create a closed system where you can practice something often. Gamification has some elements of playfulness to it. There is a lot of bad gamification with just adding points to systems that don't make them necessarily more fun.
And messing with our
brain
chemicals.
Playing with your hormones and your chemicals, right? It's creating these like addictive mechanics, which I'm really not a fan of. And it's a reality that once we know about game design, we start to know also how to trick people. We know statistically what are the mechanics of randomness. We know when it becomes a slot machine, you know? And then when you have this knowledge, you also have the responsibility to use it wisely. I think we went a bit too far in many aspects with gamification. A lot of people talk to me about their kids being addicted to video games or citing some examples of games that they thought, is it good for my child or not? And it's a real question because we have this power to create engaging experiences. So how do we wield this weapon in a responsible way? I think it's an important ethical debate for game designers.
Yeah, and it's a fine line because, for instance, I started again using Duolingo to practice my Dutch finally. And they added so many so they went further with everything. So they have these leadership boards and you see how you rank. And I'm totally aware that I'm being manipulated, but it works and it makes me feel more happy about practicing my Dutch every morning. And when they tell me in the next half hour, you can double your points with every lesson that you finish, I'm like, do I have another half an hour to learn Dutch? So it's actually nice. But on the other hand, the same mechanisms can also work the other way around in wasting students' time, children's time, or manipulating. So it's...
and it's not all bad. If you, for yourself, have a worthy goal and some extrinsic motivation can help you get there, and some points and rewards can help you get there because they also magnify your sense of achievement.
Yeah.
I think that's great. That's a good use of gamification.
Yeah.
Everything that's about learning a new skill will have some elements of gamification that can be applied to it, and it's great. The trick is how to not make your brain depend on these extrinsic factors and keep, in charge of your own development, of your own perspective.
Forgetting your priorities.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I forget to serve my clients and to record a podcast because I learned Dutch all the time, then I went too far.
Well, at least you'll be bilingual, I hope.
Yeah. I have podcast recordings in Dutch.
Yeah, and then it becomes like it's a way to escape reality or run away from something, and that's usually where addiction comes from. It's a way of coping with something that makes you uncomfortable.
And this comes back, I think, to what we discussed earlier: is to what extent is the game and the design of the game really driven by purpose? What is the purpose of doing all of that, and is it serving the purpose or not?
Yeah, you can look at it in many different ways. I'm a bit with Jean-Paul Sartre on it. Life has no purpose. You have to define your own purpose, your own project in the world. You are ontologically free, even though sometimes you don't want to be. You want to escape your responsibility and say, it's the system that made me do it. Yeah. Still, if you're really honest with yourself, you choose to perpetuate some behaviors or patterns or thoughts. And any moment where we, not temporarily, but for a long period of time, relinquish our freedom and give it to a system because it makes us feel less in pain, then there is probably some introspection to be done and think, okay, what emotion am I avoiding? Of what difficult decision am I postponing? Sometimes we do need this time. We just need to get away from things, and it's fine. If it just becomes a lifestyle, then that's a problem. And if it becomes also a way to never address the problems, then it's also a stagnation, and it's not good for any human. It's against the philosophy of game design, because you're not growing and then you're not having fun. And the game designer Jane McGonigal, who is someone I really admire, who is really the creator of this mindset of make a game out of your life to get better. She created this game Super Better to get better herself. Nice. And then really applied this to many, many aspects. And she said that the opposite of fun is not work, it's depression. It's this state of like total, stagnation to the point where you are becoming apathetic. Yeah. And not putting any effort into anything.
Reminds me of a quote I once read: the opposite of love is not hate, but indifference.
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah.
Because hate involves as many feelings and emotions, just in the different direction, but indifference is, apathy.
Apathy.
A French and a German trying to pronounce English words. Awesome. To wrap up, imagining that someone fell asleep after minute 1, just woke up, and was like, okay, what the hell was going on? What do I need to remember from this conversation?
Get out there, play some games, give yourself some challenges, and find meaning in your own purpose.
Cool. Thank you for taking the time, Coline.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.